The Cirrus Ascendant drifted through the inky void of the Erythea system, its sleek form illuminated by the soft glow of distant stars. Captain Miriam Hanley stood at the bridge's viewport, staring out at the unknown, her mind already working through the next set of calculations for their upcoming jump. Their mission had been simple: explore a seemingly uninhabited star system, survey the planets, and gather data on any potential resources. But something wasn't right. The silence of space felt too silent. The first anomaly was discovered by Lieutenant Reed, an astrophysicist with a gift for detecting patterns others overlooked. The crew had been working in the background, scanning the usual metrics: radiation, atmospheric composition, gravitational anomalies, until Reed's instruments picked up something strange. A faint signal, so weak that it appeared as nothing more than static interference on their main comms frequency. But Reed wasn't convinced. His instincts screamed that the signal was deliberate, not random. "Captain," Reed's voice cut through the low hum of the bridge, drawing Hanley's attention. "You need to see this." Hanley stepped toward Reed's station, where the young officer was manipulating a series of holographic screens. On one of the screens, a series of irregular pulses appeared, a frequency pattern unlike anything they had encountered before. The signal wasn't from any known source: no ships, no satellites, no comm stations. It was coming from deep within the Erythea system itself. "Is it a distress signal?" Hanley asked, her voice skeptical but intrigued. "Not quite," Reed said, shaking his head. "I think it's too old for that. It's been here for longer than we've been in this system. Something, or someone, has been waiting here for a very long time." The crew scrambled to decipher the signal, but it was unlike anything they had encountered. It didn't contain the usual distress markers, but rather an intricate web of encrypted code that seemed to shift and evolve the deeper they probed. Reed was fascinated, but there was a gnawing unease in the pit of Hanley's stomach. The longer they stared at it, the more it felt like something watching them. Over the following days, things began to spiral. Small, seemingly unrelated incidents became more frequent across the ship. Equipment malfunctioned for no apparent reason, navigational charts warped, and the crew began experiencing vivid dreams of an ancient civilization that had vanished long before humanity's first steps into the stars. Dreams of towering structures, strange symbols, and landscapes that felt familiar yet impossibly distant. On the fifth day, things took a darker turn. The ship's automated systems, which had been glitching sporadically, now began to exhibit more malevolent behavior. Communications with Earth were disrupted, and then, inexplicably, the Cirrus Ascendant was locked out of its regular navigation controls. The crew's panic began to rise. In the midst of all this, Reed made a chilling discovery. Every time they tried to trace the source of the signal, it seemed to move, as if the signal itself was alive and adapting to their attempts to locate it. Hanley's thoughts raced. Was the signal a trap? A lure left by some forgotten race, or perhaps a warning? Something ancient and alien had been waiting for them. Yet, as strange and ominous as it all seemed, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a signal. They were being called. Their presence in this distant corner of the galaxy had awakened something long dormant, and it was far too late to turn back now. As the crew scrambled to regain control of the ship and decode the increasingly elusive signal, a low hum filled the air, reverberating through the metal hull of the Cirrus Ascendant. It was a sound that vibrated in the bones, not unlike the sound of distant thunder. Hanley looked up from the console, her heart pounding. In the distance, just outside the viewport, a glowing anomaly had appeared, a swirling, pulsating mass of energy, darker than the surrounding void. It was no longer just a signal, it was an invitation, and humanity had answered. The anomaly outside the Cirrus Ascendant grew larger, its shape slowly coming into focus. It was not just an ordinary energy field, it was a structure, a vast, spiraling form that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. The crew stared in awe as the massive, shimmering form seemed to stretch impossibly across the stars. It was almost as if space itself was bending around the object, warping in ways that defied natural law. Captain Hanley stood at the command console, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She had never seen anything like this in her years of exploration, and yet she knew they had to investigate further. The signal had led them here, and now there was no turning back. This was no accident. This was a call, one that had been waiting for humanity to answer. "Reed, can you get a better read on it?" Hanley asked, her voice steady, though a knot of tension tightened in her chest. Lieutenant Reed nodded, his fingers flying over the console, his expression growing more confused with each passing second. "I'm trying, Captain, but the readings are all over the place. It's not just a structure. It's like it's alive, shifting, and adapting. The energy levels keep fluctuating. I've never seen anything like it." The rest of the bridge crew stood silently, observing the unfolding events with a mix of curiosity and dread. The vastness of the object before them felt like a weight, pressing down on their minds. The hum that had filled the ship earlier was now growing louder, vibrating the walls of the vessel. It was as if the ship itself was becoming attuned to the anomaly's pulse, sensing with its rhythm. "We can't ignore it," Hanley said, her voice resolute. "Set a course for the anomaly. Let's get closer." Reed hesitated, glancing at the readings one more time before inputting the course. "Aye, Captain, but I'll warn you now, the gravitational forces around it are strong. We'll need to maneuver carefully to avoid being pulled in." "Understood," Hanley replied, watching as the Cirrus Ascendant slowly began its approach, the anomaly looming ever larger in the viewport. The closer they got, the more surreal the sight became. The structure shimmered, its surface constantly shifting, as if made of liquid light, but beneath the surface, ancient symbols, alien glyphs that had not been seen in millennia, flashed and disappeared in patterns too quick for the human eye to fully comprehend. As they neared, Hanley could feel the tension in the air grow. It was as if the entire universe was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the anomaly's surface rippled. A sudden burst of energy shot out in all directions, slamming into the ship's hull. The Cirrus Ascendant shook violently, alarms blaring throughout the vessel as systems were overloaded. "Shields up! Brace for impact!" Hanley shouted. The crew scrambled to stabilize the ship, but the force was too great. The Cirrus Ascendant lurched, its trajectory thrown off course as the massive gravitational pull of the anomaly began to take hold. The ship was being dragged toward the center of the phenomenon, its engines straining to maintain control. "Reed, can we reverse course?" Hanley demanded, her eyes locked on the swirling vortex that now dominated their view. "I'm trying, Captain," Reed responded, panic creeping into his voice. "But something's interfering with the navigation. The systems are locking us in. It's as if the ship doesn't want to leave." Hanley's heart raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. The Cirrus Ascendant was caught in a web of energy far beyond their understanding. The anomaly was not just a beacon, it was a prison, and they had just walked straight into its trap. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the comms. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. "Humanity, you are the chosen." The words were broken, as if the message was being transmitted through ancient, decaying technology. "You are the key to everything." The voice faded, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The room was still, except for the constant hum of the ship's systems. What did it mean? Who was speaking? And why had humanity been chosen? Hanley glanced at Reed, who was staring at the comm panel with wide eyes. "Get that signal back, now." "I'm trying, Captain, but it's too weak. I can't lock onto it." Hanley clenched her fists, her mind racing. They had just been thrust into something far larger than they could have imagined. And the more they discovered, the more dangerous it seemed. One thing was clear. The universe had not only noticed humanity, It had been waiting for them. The hum from the anomaly continued to vibrate through the ship, an unsettling lullaby that promised more answers, but at a cost, and as they drifted deeper into its grasp, Hanley couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far darker than they could ever imagine. The Cirrus Ascendant groaned as it was pulled deeper into the heart of the anomaly, the ship's systems fighting against the invisible force that seemed determined to drag them into its depths. Hanley's grip on the armrest tightened as the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the air seemed to grow heavier, filled with a static charge that buzzed in the crew's ears. "Captain, the gravitational pull is intensifying," Reed reported, his voice strained. "I can't stabilize us much longer." "How long do we have?" Hanley asked, her voice a low growl. She wasn't asking for good news, she just needed to know what they were dealing with. Reed's fingers danced over the console. "Maybe an hour? Less. If we don't break free soon, we'll be pulled in." Before Hanley could respond, a sharp, high-pitched sound echoed throughout the ship, and the main screen flickered to life. The swirling mass outside had begun to split apart, revealing something beneath, a massive structure, its surface dotted with strange, glowing symbols, shifting with a rhythm as though alive. The ship was heading straight toward it, drawn inexorably to the heart of whatever this alien phenomenon was. "Helm, steer us away," Hanley barked. The ship's engines roared in protest, but they weren't strong enough to escape the anomaly's grip. "We've tried every maneuver, Captain," Reed snapped. "The systems are locked down. This isn't just gravity, it's something else, a force we can't even begin to calculate." As the ship neared the structure, the walls of the bridge seemed to ripple with an eerie light. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through every nerve, every bone. The crew felt it. This wasn't just a place, it was a presence. Something ancient and powerful watched them, and its gaze was absolute. "Can we get any more from the signal?" Hanley demanded, looking at Reed. "I've traced it, but it's fragmented. It's been encrypted for eons, and the energy field is distorting it." Wait, I've got something." Reed paused, eyes wide with recognition. "This isn't just a signal. It's a message. A warning. It's not meant for us specifically, but humanity in general." Hanley's mind raced. A warning from whom, and why us? "That's the thing, Captain," Reed replied. "It's been lying dormant, but it's been activated because of us. Our arrival triggered it. Whoever or whatever sent this message, they knew we would come." Just then, the ship jolted again, the monitors flashing red as alarms blared. The structure outside the viewport had begun to pulse, its symbols shifting faster now. There was a moment of absolute stillness, then a terrifying sound, a deep, resonating thrum like the heartbeat of a dying star. It vibrated through the Cirrus Ascendant, and suddenly the walls of the ship flickered, as if reality itself was beginning to twist. "What's happening to the ship?" shouted Lieutenant Marlowe, one of the engineering officers, as sparks flew from the console behind her. "It's warping. The structure's influence is distorting our systems," Reed said, panic rising in his voice. "We're losing control." Hanley didn't have time to think. Her instincts kicked in. "Everyone, brace for impact. We're going in." With no other option, Hanley keyed in manual override on the controls, forcing the ship toward the anomaly's heart. The structure was too close now, no avoiding it. She could feel the pressure on her chest, like invisible hands squeezing. Time seemed to stretch as the Cirrus Ascendant shuddered and groaned, its hull creaking under the weight of unknown forces. "Captain!" Reed cried out, eyes wide as the ship's systems began to blink in and out. "I've got something." There's a voice coming through the signal. It's not human, but it's... Before Reed could finish, the entire bridge was engulfed in a blinding flash of light. A burst of energy enveloped them, and Hanley's world tilted violently. Then everything went dark. When Hanley opened her eyes, the familiar hum of the Cirrus Ascendant was gone. Instead, she found herself in an eerie silence. She was still on the bridge, but something had changed. The walls shimmered with strange, glowing symbols, their shapes fluid, as though written in the fabric of space itself. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and the ground beneath her felt different, warped, as if reality itself had been stretched and compressed. "Status report," Hanley ordered, her voice cutting through the stillness. "We're not in the same place," Reed's voice came, trembling from the comms. "The coordinates we had, they don't match. It's like we've been pulled into another dimension." Hanley's breath caught. This was no longer the deep space they knew. They had crossed a threshold, entering something beyond their comprehension. The walls pulsed with an eerie glow, and then, from the depths of the silence, a voice echoed in Hanley's mind, a voice that resonated with ancient power. "You have come." The words were clear, though they reverberated like an echo from the farthest reaches of time. And now, the eternal whisper begins. The universe had shifted, and humanity was no longer just an observer. They were at the center of something vast, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The silence that had consumed the bridge was broken by the sudden sound of alarms blaring. The Cirrus Ascendant was no longer drifting through the anomaly. It was anchored, tethered to an unseen force. Hanley's heart raced as she stood up, scanning the bridge. The walls pulsed with unnatural energy, their glowing symbols shifting and swirling like living creatures. The familiar hum of the ship's systems was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness that seemed to crush the crew's spirits. "Reed, get a read on our location," Hanley commanded, her voice sharp with urgency. "What happened to the anomaly?" Reed, still shaken, began furiously tapping at his console. "Captain, I don't know. We're not in normal space anymore. It's like we've crossed into another dimension. The stars outside are all wrong. There's no familiar navigation reference. And the signal, it's gone silent." Marlowe, the ship's lead engineer, stepped forward, eyes wide with panic. "We're stuck, Captain. Whatever this place is, it's interfering with our systems on a fundamental level. Power fluctuations are spiking. We can't get any of our comms or propulsion systems to work properly." Hanley clenched her fists, trying to steady her thoughts. They were caught in some kind of cosmic trap, pulled into a realm beyond the scope of human understanding. The Cirrus Ascendant was a ship meant to travel the vastness of space, yet now it felt like an insect pinned to a corkboard, utterly helpless. "Get me something, anything, Reed," she pressed. "I need to know what's going on here." Reed worked feverishly, sweat beading on his forehead as his fingers flew over the console. "I'm trying, Captain, but everything's out of alignment. This place, it's warping the very fabric of reality. It's like nothing we've encountered. The laws of physics aren't behaving the same way. I can't make sense of it." The tension in the air thickened as an eerie, almost whispering voice filled the comms, distant but unmistakable. "You have crossed the threshold. You are now in the domain of the Exoneri." The words sent a chill down Hanley's spine. The Exoneri, the same race that had been alluded to in the Rylo's cryptic warnings. A race that existed not just in physical form, but through the manipulation of time, consciousness, and perception itself. The implications were horrifying. "Who are the Exoneri?" Hanley demanded, her voice cutting through the shock. Reed shook his head, his voice shaky. "They're an ancient race, Captain. We thought they were a myth, a legend. The Rylos spoke of them, but never in detail. They've been out of sight for thousands of years, and now we're in their domain. The Exoneri are not just conquerors, they're manipulators. They control not only space, but time itself. They bend minds, twist thoughts, erase histories. They are beyond us." "What do they want with us?" Hanley asked, her voice cold, despite the fear beginning to gnaw at her. "They've been watching us," Reed said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've unknowingly triggered something, their return, perhaps. They've known humanity would rise, and they've been waiting for us. They want us to bend to their will. But they won't let us leave, not without a cost. Marlowe spoke up, her face pale. They've already infiltrated us. This ship, this place, everything we're seeing is part of their manipulation. We're being trapped in their reality, twisted into their control. I can feel it, like we're not really here, not fully. Hanley's mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of information. The Actionary had been dormant for millennia, but now that humanity had arrived, they were reawakening. The Seer's Ascendant was caught in the grip of something far greater than any of them had realized. Get the mainframe back online, Hanley ordered, her tone hardening. We're not staying here. If we don't fight back, we're going to be trapped forever. If the Actionary control this space, then they control everything. We need to find a way to break free. Marlowe nodded, turning back to the control panel, but before she could make any progress, the walls of the bridge flickered with an ominous energy. The symbols on the walls began to shift faster, their movement now erratic and chaotic, and the atmosphere grew heavier, thick with an unseen presence. Captain Reed called out, his voice strained. I'm getting another signal. It's faint, but it's coming through. Where is it from? Hanley asked, her attention snapping to him. It's coming from inside the ship, Reed replied, his eyes wide with disbelief. It's coming from the core, but it's not human. The crew froze. The core was the heart of the Seer's Ascendant, the engine that powered the ship's systems and kept them alive. But now it seemed to have become a beacon for something else, a dark force hidden within the vessel itself. Get to the core, now, Hanley ordered, her voice low and steady, despite the pounding of her heart. We're dealing with something inside us as much as out there. We need to stop it before it's too late. The crew hurried toward the access tubes, each step echoing with the knowledge that they were walking deeper into a trap of their own making. The Actionary were not merely invaders, they were manipulators of reality, and they had made their first move. But Hanley had no intention of becoming their puppet, not without a fight. The crew made their way through the Seer's Ascendant with a renewed sense of urgency, each step feeling heavier as the eerie, oppressive presence seemed to grow stronger. The ship's once familiar corridors now felt alien, distorted by the unnatural energy that had taken hold. Every corner they turned seemed to pulse with the same strange symbols that had appeared on the walls of the bridge. The ship itself was no longer just a vessel, it was part of the trap, a prison designed by forces that humans couldn't begin to understand. As Hanley led the crew toward the core, her mind raced. The message from the unknown signal had come from inside the ship. Something was awakening, something ancient and powerful. She could feel it in the air, in the very walls around her, pressing down on her thoughts. The Actionary were far beyond the reach of any military force humanity had, and their ability to manipulate not just space, but reality itself was terrifying. Captain, Reed said, his voice tight with anxiety, I don't think we're going to make it. The energy levels are spiking. Whatever is inside the core, it's amplifying the anomaly's influence. It's getting harder to think straight. We don't have a choice, Hanley replied, her jaw set. We have to shut it down. Whatever they're trying to do, we can't let them succeed. Marlowe, her face pale, added, if the core's been corrupted, it's more than just the ship's systems that are in danger. This energy could spread beyond the Seer's Ascendant. We could be looking at a ripple effect that reaches back to Earth, back to every human colony. It's not just us at risk anymore. The corridors grew darker as they approached the engine room, the flickering lights casting long, jagged shadows. Hanley's pulse quickened with every step, the sense of something watching them, something ancient, intelligent, and patient, was growing stronger. They had walked into the heart of the storm, and they didn't know if they could escape. When they reached the door to the core chamber, the air in the hallway thickened, the oppressive energy seeming to seep from beneath the metal. Hanley didn't hesitate. She slammed her palm against the door's control panel. and the massive metal doors slid open with a groan. What they found inside was beyond anything they had imagined. The core chamber was no longer just a mechanical heart of the ship. It was a nexus, a place where the boundaries between reality and the unknown had thinned. The central power core, once a simple fusion reactor, now hummed with an eerie, sickly glow. It pulsed rhythmically, sending out waves of energy that distorted the air around it, twisting the room itself into strange, fluid shapes. The symbols from the walls were now carved into the core itself, glowing with an alien light. And at the center of the core, floating in the heart of the twisted mass of energy, was a figure. It was humanoid, but not human. It seemed to shimmer in and out of focus, its form constantly shifting, as though it was only partially real. The figure's eyes were endless voids, pools of darkness that seemed to consume everything around them. Hanley's heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. The Exoneri were not just manipulating their environment. They were using the core to project themselves into the ship's reality, to control them from within. "This is it," Reed whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "They've taken control of the core. They've made it their anchor in this dimension. We're trapped in their web." The figure's gaze turned toward them, and Hanley felt a cold chill crawl up her spine. There was no sound, no voice, but she could feel it, its presence, pressing against her mind. It was as if the Exoneri were reaching into her thoughts, testing her, exploring her. "You're not meant to be here," the figure's voice boomed, but it was not spoken aloud. It resonated within her mind, deep and insistent. "You are intruders in a realm that has been forgotten for eons. Humanity's time is not yet. But now that you have come, there can be no turning back." The air crackled with energy, and Hanley's mind raced. She had to act. If they didn't disrupt the core's power source now, they would be lost forever. The very fabric of space was beginning to distort, the walls of the chamber warping as the Exoneries will took hold. "We'll see about that," Hanley muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Her hand moved instinctively to her sidearm, and she motioned for the crew to take cover. "Reed, Marlowe, get to the core's control systems," she ordered. "We need to shut it down now, no matter the cost." The crew moved quickly, but it was already too late. The moment they stepped closer to the control panels, the Exoneries' influence tightened around them. Reed's fingers froze over the console, his face contorting in pain. Marlowe stumbled, gasping for breath as her vision blurred. "We can't," Reed shouted, struggling to push through the mental pressure. "It's too strong. We can't shut it down." The Exoneries' presence surged, and Hanley felt herself being pulled into their grip. The reality around her began to twist again, the ship's walls folding in on themselves like paper being crushed. There was no escape. The force was too great. But just as she felt the final moments of her consciousness slipping away, a thought pierced the dark fog, the realization that humanity wasn't just a passive player in this game. They had crossed the threshold for a reason. They were not meant to bow to ancient gods of the cosmos. Humanity had always been the force that pushed back against fate, and now they had to fight for their place in the stars. Hanley's mind raced, struggling to break free from the suffocating grip of the Exoneries' influence. The energy in the room swelled, crushing the air from her lungs, distorting her thoughts. The core, once a simple engine of propulsion, now felt like a living entity, pulsating with dark power. She could feel it. Something ancient, something vast, was pushing into her consciousness, seeking to dominate, to bend her to its will. But amidst the chaos, something snapped. A flicker of clarity broke through the fog in her mind. The Exoneri were powerful, yes, but they underestimated humanity's capacity to resist, to survive, to adapt. "Reed," Hanley gasped, struggling to focus. "You need to override the core systems manually. It's our only shot." Reed was still gripping the control panel, his fingers trembling as the Exoneries' presence wrapped around his mind like a vice. He was gasping for breath, his face pale as if the very air had turned to acid. "I can't," Reed started, but his words faltered as the weight of the alien influence bore down on him. Marlowe, still recovering from the shock, staggered over to Reed's side. She clenched her fists, her eyes wild with determination. "We don't have a choice. We've been trained for this. We can do this." She shoved Reed aside and quickly accessed the control terminal. The symbols on the screen were constantly shifting, flickering between alien patterns that seemed to defy all logic. The core systems were corrupted, the anomaly's influence warping every calculation, but Marlowe wasn't going to let that stop her. "Captain," Marlowe said, voice tight with resolve, "I can't fix this from here. The core is tied directly to the anomaly. If we want to cut the connection, we'll have to sever the link manually from inside the core itself." Hanley nodded, her eyes narrowing with a fierce determination. "Then we go inside. We break the link, no matter what it takes." With the core chamber trembling under the Exonary's influence, Hanley grabbed a nearby tool from the engineering station. It was a cutting torch, a simple device, but it would do the job. She motioned for Reed and Marlowe to follow her as she made her way toward the glowing center of the room, where the figure still hovered, its eyes endless voids that threatened to pull her under. The Exonary entity spoke again, its voice a low hum that vibrated through their bones. "You do not understand. Your defiance is futile. The galaxy is ours to shape. Humanity will bow or be erased." Hanley's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve did not waver. She stepped toward the center, the cutting torch in her hand, now blazing with searing heat. As she approached the heart of the core, the room began to ripple, the walls warping as if reality itself was being pulled apart. "Get ready," Hanley muttered to Reed and Marlowe. "Once we start, there's no turning back." She reached the core's central unit, where the dark figure pulsed with an unnatural energy. The air crackled with raw power, and as Hanley brought the torch closer, the figure's eyes snapped open, locking onto her. The pressure in the room intensified, and for a moment, she felt as though her very soul was being crushed by the weight of its gaze. "No, you will not disrupt the flow," the Exonary entity boomed, its voice now a roar that rattled her bones. "You will submit." In that moment, Hanley felt the full force of the Exonary's will. It wasn't just manipulating their environment, it was seeping into their minds, eroding their thoughts, reshaping them. Every part of her being screamed to resist, but the pressure was overwhelming. She could feel her strength draining away. But then, as if something deep within her instinctively responded to the call, a spark of defiance ignited within Hanley's heart. Humanity had always been a force of stubborn resilience. The same force that had driven them to survive wars, diseases, and the void of space itself. They had never been meant to be passive victims of fate. "You want submission." Hanley spat, her voice rising above the roar. "Then you'll have to break us." With that, she thrust the cutting torch directly into the core's energy matrix. The moment the torch made contact, the ship's systems screamed in protest, and a blast of energy radiated outward, throwing them all back. The room exploded in a burst of light, as though reality itself was being torn asunder. The Exonary figure shrieked in fury, its form unraveling before their eyes. The energy rippled violently, the walls collapsing in on themselves as the anomaly's grip began to weaken. Hanley was thrown to the ground, the force of the blast rattling her body. When she regained consciousness, everything was still. The oppressive weight in the air had lifted, and the walls of the core chamber were no longer warping. The ship's systems, though damaged, were still intact. The central core was no longer glowing with dark power. Instead, it was now silent, inert. Reed slowly stood up, wiping blood from his forehead. Marlowe followed, blinking in confusion. The Exonary presence had vanished, and for the first time since entering the anomaly, the crew felt a sense of calm return to the ship. But Hanley knew they hadn't won yet. They had severed the immediate link to the Exonary, but the threat was still out there, waiting. Humanity had resisted once, but the galaxy was vast, and the Exoneri were only one of many forces that might seek to challenge them. "We've bought ourselves some time," Hanley said, her voice hoarse but resolute. "But we need to be ready. Whatever's coming next, we'll face it together." The battle had only just begun. The Cirrus Ascendant was silent, the oppressive energy that had consumed it now gone, leaving only the hum of the damaged systems and the faint, ghostly echoes of the battle that had raged within. Hanley stood in the center of the core chamber, her chest heaving with the aftermath of the struggle. She could feel the weight of the decision they had just made settling on her shoulders. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. "We're alive," Reed said quietly, his voice still strained from the psychic backlash of the Exoneri's influence. He wiped his brow, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "But I don't think we can just go back to how it was, not after what we've experienced." "No," Hanley agreed, her gaze distant as she stared at the now dormant core. "The Cirrus Ascendant is no longer just a ship. It's a symbol. We've crossed a line, and I don't think we'll ever be the same again." Marlowe stepped forward, her eyes wide, filled with a combination of awe and fear. "Captain, do you think they'll come after us? The Exoneri? What if they're not gone?" "That's what we need to figure out," Hanley said. "They've manipulated reality, bent it to their will. If they were able to do that once, they can do it again. We might have severed the direct link, but they're still watching us. We haven't seen the last of them." She turned to Reed, who was still analyzing the ship's systems. "Reed, I need a full scan of the ship. The anomaly might be gone, but I suspect we're still carrying traces of it. We need to know if there are any lingering effects, and I want to make sure the ship's propulsion and communication systems are stable." Reed nodded, his fingers flying across the control panel. "On it, Captain. I'll have a full diagnostic in a few minutes." Hanley's mind drifted back to the figure in the core. It had felt more like an intelligence than just a physical presence. The way it twisted reality, how it spoke into their minds. It was as though it wasn't just a part of the ship or the anomaly, but a manifestation of something far older, far more dangerous. The Exoneri had been manipulating humanity from the shadows for eons. The question was, how much did they really know about humanity, and why had they chosen now to make their move? The thought weighed heavily on her as she looked at Marlowe. "Do you think we were meant to stumble into this? The Rylos warned us, but did they know what we would face? Were they really preparing us for this?" Marlowe hesitated, her voice low. "I don't think even the Rylos understood the full scope of what we're dealing with. The Exoneri have been hidden for so long. Maybe even the Rylos couldn't have foreseen the consequences of our interference." Hanley's gaze sharpened. "If that's true, then we've just scratched the surface of something far bigger than we imagined. The Exoneri aren't just a threat to us, they might be a threat to the entire galaxy." Before Marlowe could respond, Reed looked up, his face tight with worry. "Captain, you need to see this." Hanley hurried over to him, her pulse quickening. On the main screen, a map of the surrounding sector flickered into view, showing the current position of the Cirrus Ascendant relative to known star systems. But something was off. The star charts were beginning to shift, the positions of stars and planets warping like ripples in a pond. And there, at the center of it all, was a massive, shifting anomaly, almost identical to the one they had just escaped. "It's not just a local effect," Reed said, his voice filled with dread. This isn't just about the Cirrus Ascendant. The Exoneri's influence seems to be spreading, radiating outward. It's distorting entire star systems. Something's wrong with the fabric of space itself." Hanley felt her stomach drop. The Exoneri were manipulating reality on a scale that was beyond anything they had ever encountered. They weren't just isolating humanity, they were warping the very space around them, shifting the laws of the universe. The anomaly wasn't gone, it had expanded, and they had just become its epicenter. How far has it spread? Hanley demanded, her voice steady despite the rising panic. I don't know yet, Reed answered, the tension in his voice palpable. But we're at the epicenter. If the Exoneri are behind this, they've been slowly unraveling space for centuries, maybe longer. We've just stepped into the heart of their domain, and they've made their move. Hanley stood frozen, trying to process the enormity of the situation. The Cirrus Ascendant wasn't just a ship anymore, it was a beacon, a marker in the war between humanity and the forces that had been lurking in the galaxy for eons. The battle for survival had only just begun, and she could feel the weight of it bearing down on her. We can't let this spread, Hanley said, her voice resolute. We've seen what happens when the Exoneri gain control. We have to stop them, no matter the cost. Reed looked up, his expression grim. You're right, Captain. We're the only ones who know what they're capable of. If we don't find a way to stop this, we could lose everything. Earth, the colonies, every trace of humanity. The Exoneri won't stop until they've reshaped the entire galaxy in their image. The ship was at the epicenter of a cosmic catastrophe, and as the crew gathered around, there was no doubt left in Hanley's mind. They were the last line of defense against a force that could erase humanity from existence. And they would fight, because that's what humans did. They fought, and they would win. The silence that had once settled over the Cirrus Ascendant now felt like a momentary reprieve, a fragile breath before the inevitable storm. Hanley stood at the command deck, staring out at the anomaly that rippled through space, its tendrils stretching further with every passing moment. The vastness of the galaxy, once a symbol of humanity's limitless potential, now seemed like a vast, empty void. Humanity had always been a force of nature, driven by the will to survive, to explore, to conquer the impossible. But now, for the first time, Hanley questioned whether that drive could truly protect them against an enemy like the Exoneri. The stakes were no longer just the fate of the Cirrus Ascendant. They were the fate of humanity itself. Reed and Marlowe stood behind her, both silently scanning the star charts. The Exoneri are spreading their influence, Reed said, his voice steady but laden with urgency. And it's happening fast. The anomaly is expanding exponentially. Whatever they're doing to warp space, it's like they've created a pocket universe, one that could soon envelop everything around it. Marlowe spoke next, her voice thick with frustration. This isn't just a matter of containing the anomaly. The way it's distorting space, if we don't stop it now, we could lose entire sectors of the galaxy. We're talking about realities collapsing in on themselves. Not if we can stop them, Hanley replied, her voice sharp with resolve. We've severed their hold over the Cirrus Ascendant, but we need to strike at the heart of their influence before it grows too powerful. Reed looked up at the map on the screen. There's only one way to do that. We need to find the source of this anomaly, wherever the Exoneri are tethering it, and destroy it. The question is how. Hanley's eyes narrowed. We've been dealing with a force that can warp space itself, an intelligence that manipulates reality. Destroying it won't be easy, and we can't rely on conventional weapons. We'll need to get to the center of this distortion, the point where their energy is focused. Sounds like a suicide mission, Marlowe muttered, but she didn't sound afraid. She sounded determined. We're human, Hanley said, turning to face her crew. We don't do impossible. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of their mission pressing on them. Each of them understood the stakes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ensuring the future of humanity, ensuring that they would not fade into nothingness like so many other civilizations that had come before them. The Exoneri had manipulated the stars and twisted the fabric of space itself, but humanity had something they didn't, the will to fight. We know where the anomaly is centered, Hanley continued, her voice unwavering. There's a system a few light years out, a star cluster where the fabric of space seems to be most unstable. We'll make our way there and use the Cirrus Ascendant to get as close as we can. Once we're within range, we'll deploy a disruptor pulse, something to destabilize the energy signature. Do you really think that'll work? Reed asked, skepticism in his eyes. We have no choice but to try, Hanley replied. The crew worked swiftly, gathering the necessary equipment. The Cirrus Ascendant was a ship built for deep space exploration, not combat, but it had enough systems to survive a journey into the heart of the Exonaries' influence. Hanley could feel the urgency building, the seconds ticking by like hours. As the ship moved closer to the star cluster, the distortion in space became more apparent. The stars seemed to flicker, their light wavering as if reality itself was losing its grip. The closer they got, the more the ship vibrated, the hull groaning under the stress of the shifting dimensions around them. We're approaching the center, Reed reported, his voice tight with anxiety. The energy signature is off the charts. Hanley nodded. Prepare the disruptor. Once we're in position, we make our move. The ship shuddered violently, and the crew was thrown off balance. The distortion in space was becoming unbearable. Hanley fought to steady herself, her hands gripping the rail in front of her. Stay focused, she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. We can do this. With the Cirrus Ascendant within range, the crew worked quickly, the disruptor pulse primed and ready. Hanley gave the order, and Reed pushed the final command. The ship's systems hummed as the pulse charged, sending out a burst of energy aimed directly at the heart of the anomaly. For a moment, nothing happened. The distorted space seemed to ripple, but then the heart of the anomaly exploded with a violent flare. The entire ship was rocked by the force of the release, a blinding light engulfing the cockpit. And then the distortion was gone. The stars returned to their usual positions, their light steady once more. The massive energy field that had gripped the Cirrus Ascendant began to collapse, the space around them slowly returning to normal. Hanley exhaled in disbelief, her heart pounding in her chest. It had worked. We did it, Marlowe said, her voice shaking but filled with relief. We actually did it. But Hanley knew it wasn't over. The Exonary had shown them the true scale of their power, and though they had stopped one threat, there were always others lurking in the dark reaches of space. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was but a speck in it. We've bought ourselves time, Hanley said quietly, gazing out at the stars. But the fight's far from over. Humanity will face more challenges, more threats. But we've shown that we can stand against them. The crew stood together, their bond stronger than ever. The Cirrus Ascendant had survived, and so had humanity. They had not only survived the unimaginable, they had made their mark on the galaxy. And humanity's echo would resonate across the stars, long after the Exonary were forgotten.